Hell burns on Liberty Road, 9 May 18, 2024. The sky over Charlotte, North Carolina was blackened by the huge columns of smoke billowing from the 7,741 Liberty Road complex. The 7-story concrete and steel block that was supposed to be a luxury apartment complex was now a blazing torch, a death trap that swallowed everything inside. The acrid smell of burning wood could be heard for miles. The fire, which had started as a small spark, had spread with terrifying speed, consuming the top 5 floors, which were made up of only wooden frames and flammable insulation. The crackling and cracking of burning wood mingled with the sounds of shattering glass, exploding metal, and screams through the thick smoke. Firefighters rushed in, hoses snaking like silver snakes through the fiery inferno. They rushed in, pulling the workers out of the red maze. But when the checklist was reviewed, a horrifying truth emerged. 17 people had been there that morning. Only 15 had been found. Somewhere in the burning corridors, 2 men were still trapped. DeMonte Sherrill, 30, coughed violently, collapsed on the concrete floor, already starting to burn in the infernal heat. His colleagues, sweat and smoke covering his face, clutched the charred walls as if trying desperately to find a way out. The fire was getting closer. The air was so thick, so hot, that every breath felt like a knife cutting into his lungs. There was no way out. DeMonte shakily grabbed his phone, turned on Facebook Live. His face appeared on the screen, drenched in sweat, eyes wide with fear, reflecting the oncoming fire. "We're trapped." His voice cracked. "We're in South Park. Someone, please, help us." Behind him, the sound of collapsing metal rang out like a demonic roar. Comments began to appear on the live stream. Hundreds, then thousands of people were watching. But none of them could do anything right now. A loud crack rang out. The ceiling above them cracked, and red-hot wood fell like deadly meteorites. A burning beam crashed right in front of DeMonte, blocking the last path. His co-workers screamed, but their screams were drowned out by a huge explosion. The livestream screen shook. The scene turned chaotic flashes of fire, coughing, and a figure flashed before the screen went black. When firefighters finally reached where they were trapped, all that remained was a charred phone, still with Facebook open, but no one to call for help. The flames roared, licking along the concrete walls that had turned brown from the heat. The entire building shook with each wave, like the wail of steel and cement before the brutal power of the fire. Pieces of the ceiling peeled off, falling to the floor with loud explosions, as if death were knocking on the doors of every room. Every person trapped inside. On the 6th floor, DeMonte Sherrill and Reuben Holmes stood close together, sweat pouring down their pale faces. Their eyes were red, not only from fear but also from the thick smoke that filled the space. At any moment, the fire could engulf them. "Is there anyone? Please help us," DeMonte shouted, his voice hoarse between violent coughs. Reuben shakily raised his phone, the weak light from the flashlight piercing the thick smoke. But no one knew if the rescuers could see it. Their only escape route, a stairwell on the opposite side of the building, was now engulfed in flames. There was no way back. There was nowhere to hide. Explosions rang out below, signaling the building's structural collapse. Sparks flew, drawing eerie streaks of light across the collapsing ceiling. DeMonte clutched his phone, his hand shaking. He opened the live stream, hoping for a miracle. The screen flickered in the thick smoke, the image distorted by the heat of the raging fire. "We're trapped. Someone help us," Please." His voice was muffled, echoing desperately in the suffocating space. Outside, the darkness only made the flames glow brighter, reflecting the desolation of fate. Descending 6 stories from this height meant death. But staying here was no different. They could only hope, clinging to the faint hope that someone, anyone, would find them before the fire did. Demonte took a deep breath, his chest burning as if it were being ripped apart from the inside. The heat seared his skin, the hair on his head burning. He looked at Reuben, their eyes meeting in despair. "We won't die here." Demonte muttered like a prayer, but fear still reigned in his eyes. In the distance, fire sirens blared, mixing with the rumble of the building. A slim chance, but would there be enough time? The red flames engulfed the skyscraper in South Park, raging like a hungry monster. Sparks blazed fiercely, pouring through every window, forming columns of black smoke that billowed high into the night sky. Amidst the chaos, on the 6th floor of the building, 2 men desperately clung to their last shred of hope. Demonte Sherrill and Reuben Holmes were trapped. The thick smoke was like an invisible black curtain that squeezed them, stopping their every breath. The flashlight on Reuben's phone shook, the weak rays of light unable to penetrate the toxic smoke. Demonte screamed, his voice hoarse, hoping that someone would hear their cries for help over the roar of the fire. Outside, rescuers were fighting the death knell. A giant crane reached out, the iron basket swaying in the thick smoke. But then, in the midst of the raging sea of fire, the crane operator was also trapped, forced to evacuate. The only way out now was for the rescuers themselves to rush into the blazing inferno. They rushed up the stairs, their steps hurried but cautious. Every step forward was a life or death test as the flames roared around them. The heat seared their skin, their breathing became more difficult than ever. Then, amid the crackling of burning wood, they heard a distant scream. Demonte and Reuben were still alive. The firefighters followed the sound, getting closer to the 2 victims. But then, a cold voice rang out over the radio. "All units working at 7741 Liberty Road, retreat immediately. The structure is collapsing." The order rang out like a death knell. The rescuers were forced to turn and flee, leaving behind the 2 men who were still screaming for help. For Demonte and Reuben, the glimmer of hope was quickly extinguished by a terrible nightmare. The scene fell eerily silent. The fire continued to spread, licking at the last of the walls. The temperature inside the building soared to 2003 F. The crowd outside held their breath as the massive structure let out one last roar before collapsing into a pile of rubble, taking 2 lives with it. There was nothing anyone could do. No one could save them. The story of Demonte Sherrill and Reuben Holmes spread far and wide, causing outrage. The subsequent investigation found a series of serious violations: flammable insulation, no fire alarm system, no proper fire escapes. There had even been a temporary stairwell where the 2 men were trapped, but it had been removed just hours earlier. The companies involved were fined $50,000 and faced a slew of lawsuits. But that money could not bring Demonte and Reuben back. What remains is the indelible haunting of those who witnessed the tragedy through their phone screens, where Demonte lives streamed his final distress call before being swallowed by the fiery inferno. Johnny Cashman had always been in daily contact with his family, but now 6 days had passed without any news from him. His family, extremely worried, decided to call the local police in Lynchburg, Virginia, where Johnny lived, to request a welfare check. On April 19, 2022, the police entered Johnny's apartment. Inside, A horrifying scene unfolded before their eyes. Johnny lay motionless on the floor. They immediately told his family the news. Johnny was dead. According to the coroner, he had suffered a serious medical event, resulting in gastrointestinal bleeding. A natural death. There were no signs of trauma, no evidence of assault, nothing unusual. But Johnny's family couldn't believe it. Only 4 months ago, he had received a clean bill of health. How could this have happened? When the family considered asking for an autopsy, they were assured by the police that it was unnecessary. And so they resigned themselves to the painful reality, having Johnny's body cremated and taken back to Maine. But the story doesn't end there. 10 days later, Johnny's ex-girlfriend and her mother returned to the apartment to retrieve some belongings. They knew it would be difficult to return, but they couldn't have imagined what awaited them inside. Blood. Blood everywhere. Along the walls, on the chairs, splattered on the ceiling, soaked into the carpets. Bloody handprints on the walls, as if someone had struggled desperately. It was like a scene from a horror movie. It was unbelievable that a natural death could leave such a mark. Panicked, they quickly took pictures of the scene and rushed outside, finding one of Johnny's neighbors. This neighbor installed a security camera across from Johnny's apartment, and on the day Johnny died, the camera recorded something terrifying. 3:03 p.m. Johnny returned home. He seemed to be holding an empty glass, indicating that he might have been drinking. He entered the door code and entered the apartment as usual. But just a few minutes later, something happened inside. From outside, the camera recorded a loud scream. Oh man! What the hell? Hey! Stop! What is it? A terrible scream echoed in the quiet space, accompanied by loud banging and the sound of objects falling. A fierce struggle took place in the darkness inside the apartment. And then, silence. But the most terrifying thing was not over yet. Just 7 minutes after the last scream, a strange man walked out of Johnny's apartment. He was not Johnny. He stood there, hesitated for a moment, then turned back, put his hand on the doorknob, and wiped it with his sleeve. He seemed to be erasing his tracks. Then he walked quietly down the stairs, stood still for a few seconds as if trying to compose himself, and then disappeared into the darkness. Johnny's body was cremated. Any potential evidence was gone forever. But the truth remained, haunting those who knew the story. Did Johnny Cashman really die of natural causes? Or was there some other chilling secret buried in that apartment? The scene in Johnny's apartment is shrouded in a cold and haunting atmosphere. When you enter, you can immediately feel the suffocating silence, a silence that is in stark contrast to Johnny's screams just a few minutes ago. The bloodstains on the floor, on the white walls that have turned bright red, are traces of a fierce struggle, a desperate struggle of the man against his impending death. The footage that the police collected is a vivid testimony of what happened in that room. Even though the investigators deny it, you can hear growls, vague screams, broken among the chaotic sounds of a fight. Each sound seems to tell a terrifying story, a struggle not just with someone, but with one's own life. In the far corner, you could see a strange man, Stephen Church, wiping his fingerprints, his face full of anxiety and panic. He was like a sinner, trying to erase all traces, even though he knew that he could not escape from what had happened. It seemed that he had witnessed everything, from Johnny's painful struggle to his death. His hair was disheveled, sweat was beading on his forehead, and his eyes could not hide his regret. But when it was all over, he was left alone, standing in a sea of blood and silence. At this moment, Johnny's tears, if any, were drowned in pain. He might have been beaten, attacked, maybe a fatal punch to the stomach, causing blood to spurt from internal wounds, forming large pools of blood on the floor. Blood flowed everywhere, seeping into the carpets and walls, traces of a death that was not gentle. The feeling of dread lingered in the air as Johnny's screams slowly died away, leaving no sound, only an eerie silence. And then it all ended when the police arrived, with clear signs that something was amiss with the story they were trying to tell. When Stephen claimed that he left before a medical emergency, those words seemed like an excuse for his own actions. The audio in the video did not reflect a normal argument, as he said, but a struggle, a fight to the death. And when people heard gasps, thumps, and confused voices, it was clear that something had happened in that apartment, a death that was not as simple as people tried to make it seem. Stephen's story may have been exposed, but it still could not explain the truth behind the haunting traces in Johnny's apartment. All was silence, blood, and unanswered questions. On a hot July morning, as the sun rose high in the sky, the first rays of light illuminating a quiet San Antonio street, Bethany Martin, 17, and her 16-year-old friend decided to walk to the gas station near their home. The air was hot like any other summer morning, but today there was something strange waiting for them on this ordinary road. The road they were walking along ran parallel to a drainage ditch, which was usually filled with trash and discarded materials. But this morning, something caught their attention. A man's figure, hunched over and leaning against an old concrete wall, seemed completely at peace. But as the two girls walked closer, they sensed something unusual about the man's appearance. He was standing still, not moving, and his posture looked unnatural. A vague unease rose in their hearts as they realized that something was wrong. As they got closer, the true picture of the incident broke. The man was not resting or injured. He was dead. A cold and panicky feeling enveloped the two girls, especially when their eyes met the face of the lifeless man. The blood had not yet dried on his body, and his lips still had a chilling calmness. A gentle wind blew, as if everything around them was trying to push them away from this painful reality. However, instead of shock or pain, Bethany and her friend felt a strange curiosity. They looked at each other, then at the man, and their eyes stopped on a single object, the sparkling necklace around his neck. The medallion, a simple piece of jewelry, stood out in this terrible scene. It was as if it was whispering to them, calling for their attention. Putting aside any feelings of guilt or fear, Bethany, her eyes filled with excitement, pulled out her phone and started recording. "Oh, this is perfect for TikTok," she exclaimed as her friend watched. The video was captured in a strange atmosphere, devoid of any grief or panic. Instead, their laughter was accompanied by the sound of inappropriate sarcasm. The scene was not a cry for help or a call to the police. Instead, it was a display of calculated cruelty. With a cool movement, Bethany pulled the necklace from the man's neck, threw the metal onto the nearby grass, and handed it to her friend. Within seconds, they were gone, not even looking back at the corpse they had just desecrated. When the 16-year-old's phone uploaded the video to Snapchat and TikTok, the innocent laughter and applause from her friends only added to the horror. The two girls had no idea of the horror they had just caused. The video quickly went viral, not only on social media, but also to the family of Marcus Adams, who had died. Their carelessness had inadvertently put his loved ones through a nightmare. They were not only dealing with the death of a loved one, but also with the chilling insensitivity of the two young girls. With each passing minute, the video attracted more attention and backlash from the community. Despite being questioned by police and charged with stealing a body, Bethany still showed unwarranted regret. She could not fully understand the consequences of her actions, nor could she realize that her cruelty had crossed all boundaries, leaving a wound that could not be healed. With the medal returned to Marcus's family, what remains is a chilling tale of the insensitivity and cruelty of a generation immersed in the illusion of social media. The scene in the clip is a quiet morning. The air seems cold and heavy. The two girls sit on a bench, the dim light from the phone screen shining on their faces, making the feeling of tension even more obvious. An emotionless line appears on the screen. We remember that we found a dead body this morning, pale and cold. They do not appear shocked or sad, but simply recite the incident as if it were part of a normal day. The clip does not provide any further context or reason other than the cold text and the narration that seems to come from the souls of the participants. I wish we were joking. My thanks to the family. Viewers of the clip began to split into two camps. One side sympathized with the girls, the other criticized them for their insensitivity and disrespect towards death. The lack of context clearly made many people doubt the truth of the story, thinking that this was just a joke or a clickbait. But soon, suspicions were extinguished when a creepy discovery occurred. It turned out that this clip was not the only video the two girls had filmed that day. On the way to the gas station, they accidentally discovered the body of Marcus Adams, 25 years old, a young man who had just ended his life in a painful act of suicide. What was even more terrifying was that, as soon as they discovered the body, instead of showing panic or emotion, the girls' attention was immediately drawn to an object around the victim's neck, a necklace. This necklace, which was not a special item, seemed to strangely match the 16-year-old girl's style. She couldn't resist the temptation, and while the body was still cold on the ground, she approached, took the chain off Marcus's neck, threw the chain to the ground, quickly turned around and ran away. And that's not all. The girl posted this footage on Snapchat as part of a story for her friends, with sounds full of excitement and disrespect. "Oh my God, I got it! I did it!" Gasps and laughter rang out, completely at odds with the tragic context they should have felt. We can feel the indifference and cruelty in each of their laughter and excited tones. Even more horrifying, just a day later, the clip was spread on another platform where Marcus Adams' relatives watched the footage, many of whom didn't even know he had passed away. The helplessness and pain they felt as they watched the scene added to the chilling effect of the incident. Soon after, both girls were questioned by police. Bethany was accused of stealing the body and faced criminal charges, although she will not face serious prison time. Unfortunately, the 16-year-old's identity was never made public. The medal was returned to her family, but the images and sounds from the clip still linger in the minds of those who witnessed the incident. The 16-year-old continued to post on her TikTok, sharing her story without apologizing or expressing remorse, instead blaming her friend, saying she was forced to follow instructions and create these videos because she believed they would be a hit. This act not only caused pain to the victim's family, but also shook a society where death and respect can be forgotten in the darkness of social networks. Janelle Matthews. On the night of December 20, 1984, as the snow began to fall heavily, a chilling event occurred in the small town of Glee, Colorado. Janelle Matthews, a 12-year-old girl with long, wavy hair and bright eyes that sparkled with joy, waited in anticipation after performing in the school choir. She called her father to let him know she had arrived home safely from the performance, but that was the last anyone heard from her. When Jim Matthews returned home, he found the garage door wide open, a dim light shining through the windows. The house was empty, cold, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. Outside, the snow had settled, filling in the footprints that someone, perhaps Janelle, had left as they left, leading straight to a window. One of the few clues on that snowy night that someone had been following her. She had disappeared without a coat, shoes, or anything to protect her from the rising cold. The following hours were filled with confusion and anxiety. Neighbors, friends, and rescue workers scoured every corner of the small town, but found nothing but broken pieces of fragile hope. News of Janelle's disappearance spread quickly, not only in the local community, but across the country. The milk cartons with information about the little girl seemed to be the only ray of hope in a hopeless search. As the years passed, Janelle Matthews' disappearance became an unexplainable mystery. Any hope of finding her faded into oblivion. But one summer afternoon in 2019, when the wait seemed over, a dig in an isolated field in Weld County changed everything. The crew was installing a new plumbing system, but instead of finding something harmless, they discovered a decomposed skeleton. Next to the body were the clothes Janelle had worn to the performance that day. The bones had lost all signs of life, but that only added to the haunting feeling. The perpetrators had not only taken the life of a child, but had also taken a part of a family, a part of a community. The brutality of the act became even clearer when investigators confirmed that Janelle had been murdered with a single gunshot to the head. Her death was not an accident, but a cold-blooded murder, seemingly carried out with ruthless calculation. Immediately after the discovery of Janelle's body, the police investigated and quickly turned their attention to Stephen Pankey, a man who lived near the area where Janelle disappeared. Pankey became the prime suspect. The horror comes not only from Janelle's death, but also from the unanswered questions about why someone would commit such a horrific act against an innocent child. The story of Janelle Matthews did not end with the discovery of her body. It is a story of pain, of unanswered questions, and of a sudden death that leaves a haunting impression on everyone. In 2019, Stephen left the area as if he wanted to shake off all traces of the past, just to escape what he had done. The disappearance of Janelle Matthews haunted him, and like an inescapable pain, it followed him, an inescapable ghost. Only when Janelle's body was discovered, Stephen unexpectedly became a candidate for governor in Idaho. It seemed that he could not escape the ghosts of the past, the mysteries of his life, or the crimes he had committed. A strange Facebook post from Stephen raised suspicions. He asked the Colorado prosecutor's office to reopen the investigation, expressing concern about Janelle's disappearance and the police's mistaken focus on the kidnapping and murder theory. Just a few months later, the truth was revealed. Stephen was the one who kidnapped and killed Janelle Matthews. For all his strange statements and bizarre actions, Stephen can't seem to control his obsession with the case. Janelle's image haunts him, like a mirror reflecting the darkness in his soul. He follows the news reports about her disappearance, listening to each story as if searching for something to justify himself. He begins calling the police, providing details that only a criminal would know. Stephen's obsession doesn't stop there. His wife, who only learned at the last minute that they were leaving for California, is distressed by his lack of emotion after the death of their son, Carl. But when the day of the memorial service arrives, a strange change occurs. He walks to his son's grave, stares at the headstone, and then suddenly breaks down and says a strange sentence. "I hope God doesn't let this happen to Janelle Matthews." It was a strange illusion, a vague awareness of the fate he had sent Janelle to, a brutal death for no reason other than his own sick satisfaction. After the murder, Stephen's car had suddenly burst into flames. as if consumed in a thick black smoke, hiding the traces of his crime. When he took the burned car to the junkyard, no one knew whether he was destroying any evidence or simply running away from his past. But his calls to the police, his reminders, his constant obsession with the case, made it clear that he could not shake the shadow of guilt. And finally, as things began to unravel, Stephen was sentenced to life in prison for murder. The case dragged on for nearly 13 years, and when sentencing came in 2040, his strange statements, mysterious Facebook posts, and inexplicable actions painted a dark picture of obsession and crime. The shadow of Janelle Matthews would forever haunt Stephen, a reminder of what he had done and from which he could not escape.